since the financial crisis occurred, the phrase "too big to fail" is one that's entered popular usage. It's a bit of a flaw in a capitalist economy of some companies. The banks are effectively too important to go bust. They have too little incentive to play safe. While the city has argued that it should be rebuilt to its former glory in the wake of the recent collapse there, economists are far less sure. They don't see the too big to fail problem as a detail, but as entirely fundamental. One such economist is Simon Johnson, a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He's also a former chief economist at the International Monetary Fund. He was there when the financial crisis broke, and he's been warning that far more needs to be done to reform the banking system. I spoke to him yesterday and asked whether he was fearful that the banks are going back to business as usual.
The big banks in the United States and in the UK and many other places are already back to where they were before. You can see this in profits. You can look at the profit level, for example, through the third quarter of 2009. The banks in the United States were earning about the same as they were earning in 2005, 2006. Not the absolute peak they reached right before the crash, but they're right back where they were in the danger phase.
Do you think the politicians in general, I mean in the G20, in the UK, in the US, do you think they're a bit scared of taking on the banks and being perhaps a little tougher than they might be at this stage?
They are certainly obviously reluctant to take on the banks. I'm not sure how scared they are. I don't know how much of it is fear or capture, or, they've been convinced by the banks that you need the banks in this form, or what it is. When you talk to them at the technical level, so I still have a lot of friends and interactions at sort of a deputy minister, deputy central bank governor level, and the people who work for them, they are very much on board with the idea that the banks, as currently structured, are incredibly dangerous for the world economy. But somehow it doesn't come through in what the politicians are saying and what they're planning to do. So you're quite right. At the G20 level, there's a big disconnect right now.
There are various ideas around, aren't there? One of them is a Tobin tax. It's been associated with our own Prime Minister, a tax on global financial transactions. Is that a response, do you think, to the problems created by large banks and big bailouts?
I think it's partially a response, or it's an attempt to respond. That's not my preferred line of approach to this problem. I think that would lead to a lot of distortions, a lot of moving of activities offshore. If you did it at the full level of the G20, you might be able to get some traction. Evasion at that level would be hard. But still, I think it doesn't address the core problem, which is really about financial institutions that are too big to fail. The financial transaction tax is more of a tax on regular people like you and me.
And so your too big to fail solution is just to say banks can't be too big, is it?
Yes, actually, that's exactly. Make them small enough so they can fail. In the United States, we had a pretty substantial bank, or financial institution called CIT Group that failed earlier this year. That was about $80 billion, 80. We've also have, obviously, Goldman Sachs, which fluctuates around the $800 billion mark. This is total assets, the size of the bank. Now, Goldman Sachs is clearly too big to fail at the $800 billion mark. CIT Group was allowed to fail and is going through bankruptcy, and that has not destabilized the world at the $80 billion level. So I'm saying we should break up or put in place rules that would prevent something like Goldman Sachs from being bigger than $80 billion, or break Goldman Sachs into 10 pieces, depending on how you want to go about it.
Wow, very radical indeed. And you'd rather do that than the proposal which has been quite a bit discussed, which is forcing banks to choose between being narrow, if you like, consumer or commercial banks, and the sort of casino banks, the investment banks, completely separate from the bit that matters to everyday folk.
Well, I would actually build that into my proposal. So, at least in the U.S. legal context, what would work quite well and fit very much with legal precedent and what we've had in previous laws, although not now currently enforced, is a size cap, and you would. Your bank cannot be bigger than a certain size relative to the size of the overall economy. Now, with that, you could choose, though. If you're the bank, you can say either we're a casino bank or we're a utility bank. Utility banks being the guys who run your checking accounts and do the payments system and so on. Now, casino banks would have to have a lower cap because casino banks obviously are more dangerous. That's why they're called casino banks, or investment banks if you prefer. So the banks themselves would choose which category to fall into. Utility bank can be somewhat bigger, has a lot more regulation, is a lot more constrained, and this is the spirit of what people, what was called in the United States the Glass-Steagall Act. That there was this split. I wouldn't reimpose the Glass-Steagall Act. That in exactly that form wouldn't work. But if you have the banks choose which size cap do you wish to be under, that would be enable us to encompass both those goals.
I mean, this is more radical, more dramatic than most of what we're hearing about being actually proposed. You're not a rabble-rouser. You're a professional economist. You've been chief economist at the IMF. You're a sort of, a serious guy in all of this. Do you think that there's a consensus among economists like yourself? Is there a consensus that more should be done, that the current policy response is too slow?
Absolutely. I'm speaking to you from Atlanta. I'm attending the American Economics Association conference. There's economists here from all around the world. It's very hard to find a serious economist who studies banking and finance issues who doesn't think that the banks are a huge problem as currently constructed. And this is people from the left, right, and myself from the center. All are agreeing that these too big to fail banks have caused massive problems. And if we don't address this problem going forward, we're going to have a pretty nasty crisis at best. And at worst, you absolutely can rerun some version of the Great Depression.
Simon Johnson, thank you very much indeed.